player?
I think it's one of them like name badges.
Is it a SIM card?
Yeah, it says
It's a CD. Is it a tape?
Watching these kids struggle to identify a 3 1/4 inch floppy makes me wonder how much longer the image of a floppy disk is going to endure as a signifier of the save function. Saving progress, saving to disk is almost invariably represented in user interfaces by an image of an obsolete object. The icon has outlived the physical object it skeuomorphically represents. In the previous video in this series, we started with a history of a whimsical font called Comic Sans, and we ended up questioning the basic assumptions that underwrite the prevailing scientific understanding of reality. In this video, we're going to start with the save icon, and we're going to end with learning about the metaphysical framework that underwrites Western mystical and occult traditions. Let's ease into this with an excerpt from a TED Talk by an MIT cognitive psychologist named Donald Hoffman. The talk is titled, "Do We See Reality as It Is?"
We need some help with our intuitions. How can not perceiving reality as it is be useful? So the idea is that evolution has given us an interface that hides reality and guides adaptive behavior. Space and time, as you perceive them right now, are your desktop. Physical objects are simply icons in that desktop.
So Hoffman has coined a term for this way of looking at reality. He calls it multimodal user interface theory. MUI proposes that we'd never survive as these meat puppets on this plane of existence if we didn't sort of blur our cosmic eyes and view everything through this fuzzy, low-resolution lens that conceals the underlying complexity. Just like you'd never get anything done if icons described what they actually do. I mean, you could convert the save icon to the word save, but that word itself is just a representation of converting digital information into binary code and storing it on a physical medium for future retrieval. I'd like to see you try using an interface like this. And even that wouldn't reveal some sort of bedrock reality. Even if you revealed the binary code that underwrites all the computer's functions, those ones and zeros are themselves affordances that allow programmers to control physical processes happening in the electronics of the computer. There are semiconductors switching between logic gates on and off. These gates are physical. They exist in a realm beyond the digital. That's the bedrock of the computer's cosmology. So what MUI suggests is that those physical logic gates and the neurons of our brain and your 1992 Honda Accord and the Space Needle, the moon, the sun, the fabric of space itself, and even time are all icons on a desktop that mask a more complex realm. Physical reality and time are affordances. Good user interface design promotes ease of use. It's meant to reduce the cognitive load of the user so they can focus on what they're trying to accomplish with the software instead of struggling to decipher the interface. And this is why the floppy disk icon lives on. Once an affordance achieves universal recognition, replacing it risks causing confusion, so perpetuating this abstraction is necessary to avoid alienating users. But this ease of use, it comes at a cost: inertia. Our imagination gets stuck in these ruts that inhibit innovation. We become so comfortable with the interface that we come to believe it's the end of the line. It doesn't need to be improved upon, or further, it can't be improved upon. It's the only way available to us to interact with a computer. We mistake the familiar for the inevitable. Why? Because the familiar is good enough. Just like evolution has decided that the way we perceive reality, namely through physical objects like sunglasses and protons, is good enough to keep our meat puppets alive. And by alive, we mean our brains continue to function. The whole point of having a body is to keep blood flowing to the brain, because the brain creates consciousness, right? Well, not necessarily. That is an assumption. What if the brain doesn't create consciousness, but instead acts like a receiver or a filter for it? Your high school English teacher probably made you read Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, but they probably didn't make you read another book of his called The Doors of Perception, and that's because it's an account of him tripping out on mescaline in the Hollywood Hills. If you've ever done psychedelics, you may be familiar with the sort of downloads you get while your mind is in that wide open state. Well, the main download he brought back from his mescaline experience was that the brain isn't the source of consciousness, but is instead a funnel that narrows down a vast ocean of consciousness to a few drops that become you and me and every other conscious being. And before you write that off as the incoherent ramblings of some flaky Englishman on drugs, this concept has been explored recently by serious academics publishing in serious and well-respected peer-reviewed journals. The concept is referred to academically as non-local consciousness.
evolution.
Are you discounting whether the brain controls consciousness?
No, I think what we would say is the brain is a reducing valve or filter that allows primordial consciousness in. That is, the brain is not the creator of it.
So how would that work when we know that changes to the physical brain, whether from drugs or brain damage or congenital defects or age, these clearly correlate with changes in consciousness? We can easily demonstrate this by drinking 2 beers. It's basic cause and effect, right? I like to think about this using the metaphor of a stained glass window. In this scenario, you live your entire life in a building with no doors, and there's only one window. It's made of stained glass that lets in sunlight, but is opaque enough that you can't see anything on the outside. In fact, you aren't even aware there is an outside. Sunlight comes in, sometimes bright, sometimes dim, sometimes it's tinted blue or gold or pink. This all depends on the weather or time of day on the outside, which again, you're totally unaware of. So your intuitive understanding of the situation is that the window is the light source. If you damage the window, it'll affect the way the light refracts on the inside. If you apply a colored tint to the window, it'll change the color of the light. All the qualities of the light can be changed by making physical changes to the window. But when you make changes to the window, it has no effect on the quality of the light on the outside. That exists in a realm completely unknown to you. It's obvious where I'm going with this. The sunlight itself is pure consciousness. The window is your physical brain. The light on the inside is your individual consciousness. And when the window finally shatters, it doesn't affect the light on the outside at all, and the light on the inside just becomes pure, unfiltered sunlight. The title of Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception, is from a poem by the mystic poet William Blake. The line in that poem is, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite." There's another mystic poet, Khalil Gibran, who is influenced by William Blake, and my favorite line from him is, "For what is it to die but to stand naked in the wind and melt into the sun?" If you're familiar with Plato, you may think my stained glass metaphor is just the TMU version of Plato's famous allegory of the cave. And I don't know, maybe it is. I like my version, but it's certainly inspired by Plato. If you already know Plato's allegory of the cave, hang in there, I'll make this quick. There's a cave and some people are sitting behind a barrier facing the wall. They're looking at shadows cast by figures on the other side of the wall. The light is coming from a fire behind them, and the prisoners believe the two-dimensional shadows are all of reality. They have no clue about the 3D world outside the cave. One of them escapes, goes past the fire, climbs outside into the blinding light, and even though it's painful and disorienting, eventually they come to understand that the world is much bigger and more dimensional than they were ever capable of imagining without experiencing it. This is sometimes referred to as Gnosis, and we'll come back to Gnosis in a future video. As far as Huxley goes, his mescaline trip modified the filter of his brain in a way that allowed him to get a glimpse outside the cave or beyond the stained glass window. Other people get glimpses of this through deep meditation or near-death experiences, and there are countless ways to frame the experience.
If you're frightened of dying and you're holding on, you'll see devils tearing your life away. But if you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels, freeing you from the earth.
Centuries after Plato shuffled off his mortal coil, his philosophical outlook branched off into various cosmologies. One of these cosmologies, which was originally fleshed out by Plotinus in the 2nd century, is referred to now as Neoplatonism. The Neoplatonist cosmology is built around the idea that reality can be visualized by these concentric layers that emanate outward from a divine source, like echoes. And just as an echo decays over time, the layers of reality decay as they get further from the source, the same way that a VHS tape loses quality every time it's copied onto another VHS tape. Another example of this is the save icon. The icon is a flattened digital echo of an object that exists in 3-dimensional meat space. Over a long enough timeline, the icon itself may evolve into something vaguely resembling a floppy disk, and that's because each generation or emanation will get further away from and lose sight of the source object the icon represents. Eventually, users will forget what a floppy disk is. There's a music video that, for me, is a perfect emanationist parable. The song is Bachelorette by Björk, and the video was directed by Michel Gondry. In the video, a woman finds a magic book in the forest that starts writing itself, and the story it's writing is about her life as she's living it. She goes to the city and finds a publisher, who she falls in love with. The book becomes a massive bestseller and eventually becomes a play, which she stars in. So the play is about her finding the book, going to the city, finding a publisher, and falling in love. Then having a play made about finding the book, going to the city. You see where this is going. The video is divided into layers of progressively degrading reality. Her life becomes a copy of a copy of a copy. As we descend into these layers of degradation, you see reality lose resolution. The publishing company becomes a flimsy simulacrum of itself, and then ceases to even have an identity. It just becomes a generic publisher. Deep into this nested drama, the characters start to sense that something is off. There's something wrong with the world.
What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind.
And eventually, this microcosmic world collapses in on itself and becomes totally unrecognizable. And it's interesting that the woman's real life is black and white, but the copies of the world are in vibrant color. Sort of like Jean Baudrillard's idea of the hyperreal that he outlines in Simulacra and Simulation, where things that are fake are taken for more real than reality. The map isn't just mistaken for the territory is forsaken in favor of the map.
You're beginning to believe the illusions we're spinning here. You're beginning to think that the tube is reality and that your own lives are unreal. This is mass madness, you maniacs. In God's name, you people are the real thing. We are the illusion.
In the next video, we'll use Neoplatonism as a jumping off point.
I have no idea where this will lead us, but I have a definite feeling it will be a place both wonderful and strange.
Until then, remember that this channel will continue to grow if you're kind enough to like and subscribe. I appreciate it, and I'll see you further on down the line of that affordance we call time.